Hello and welcome to the programme which looks at the Holy Land. I am Paul Calvert. Psalm 8 verse 1 from the New King James Bible says this: O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is your name in all the earth, you who set your glory above the heavens. I'm with Liel Magen from IPCRI. Now, Liel, what is IPCRI?
Hey, IPCRI is a Center for Regional Initiatives. It's a center that was established more than 30 years ago by a group of people that organized after the first Intifada in 1987 with the idea of establishing a think tank which tries to bring new ideas and new projects that can change the relations between the two communities. In the beginning, it worked a bit underground, and then after the Oslo process, it opened up to have more open and big projects across the country. In the last 10 years, because the negotiations were kind of stopped, and the peace process was stopped, the center changed its focus from being a think tank and focusing on channels of negotiations between the sides or peace-building projects to more focusing on the needs of the communities on the ground. And by this to show that partnership between the sides can alleviate the living conditions and can maybe improve even the quality of life. And by this to create the foundations and infrastructures necessary for people to support and wanting to have better relations between the sides.
So 30 years ago, you were bringing Palestinians and Israelis together. Was this pioneering work?
Yeah, I'm young. I'm only 5 years in the organization, but back then it was very revolutionary. It was so revolutionary that they couldn't even register themselves in the Israeli authorities because they mentioned the word Palestine. We're talking about 1988, about the times of the first Intifada, times where working with the other side was perceived as very, very illegitimate. Generally, Palestinian organizations or Palestinian leadership was delegitimized in Israeli eyes. They were considered as violent. And on the other hand, Israelis, only a few from the radical left at the time were trying to have relations with the other side. But this organization, like few others, were the pioneers in eventually a very big and prosperous peace camp that was developed around the 1990s and early 2000s.
Did Oslo actually help you to develop the work that you're doing?
The Oslo process legitimized having relations with the other side. What I know from the board of directors and the founders, that Oslo process helped them to move from the shadow, from working underground and kind of anonymously, to work in public, to be exposed, and then to slowly to bring more people into these projects. However, in the second Intifada, in the late 2000s, it's where the big disappointment came up of everyone, from the peace process, from Oslo, from Camp David, and also the peace organizations found themselves in a very harsh situation where suddenly the connection between the sides is again delegitimized. The two communities are torn apart, and there was a lot of violence that increased the mistrust between the sides. This is why the peace camp in the early 2000s and in the last 2 decades moved again to a more educational work and many times behind the scenes in order for, again, to build the relationships necessary for, again, entering into dialogue and peace negotiations.
What programs do you run here?
We are now at an environmental center that was established in East Jerusalem. It's called Sinsila, Sheikh Jarrah. The main idea behind this center is to change the perspective of what it means to live in this country and what it means to live in the city of Jerusalem. And instead of looking at it only from nationalistic point of view, we try to build a coalition that is around the environmental crisis and climate change. Not only this, it's not only that we are trying to raise awareness about the environment, but we try through an environmental perspective to look at the conflict and to see how the environment is deteriorating because of the conflict. The living conditions are deteriorating. There is a lot of pollution, there is a lot of density, lack of public spaces in Jerusalem, lack of green open spaces in East Jerusalem. Unfortunately as well, there are side effects of mental health, crime, violence, etc. And we try to reverse the trend by trying to support the community and empower the community to take action through work that is around the environment and around supporting the sustainability of the city. So through courses of urban farming, beekeeping, permaculture, we teach about the environmental conditions We offer projects that generate incomes for the participants. And also we create new relationships between the sides that understand their interdependence and understand the importance of having good relations between the sides in order to alleviate the whole living conditions in the city and all the environmental reality. Beside this environmental center, another project that we are having is that we are trying to see the importance of the city in transforming the relations between the sides. So what we've done in the last 5 years was organizing delegations from Jerusalem, from East and West, to other areas of conflict and other cities that are at the core center of national conflicts. We traveled to Belfast in Northern Ireland, to Sarajevo in Bosnia, and to Nicosia in Cyprus. And in all three cities, we saw how the city and the communities living in the same urban reality was key in transforming the relations to relations of interdependence and mutual recognition, and also created new partnerships that eventually changed the situation even in the national level. Whether in Nicosia, where the negotiations started around the sewage, which connects both sides of the city, whether in Belfast, where they practice shared sovereignty of the city with rotation in the city hall, or whether in Sarajevo, that the city presents a federal structure where the city is open, but there are several city halls across the city. All three cities can give very important examples of how the future of Jerusalem can look like. A future that is based on mutual recognition, on improving living conditions, on shared sovereignty, representation, and inclusive decision-making process that now, unfortunately, is not how the city of Jerusalem looks like.
Is the conflicts in other cities similar to the conflict here, or is it completely different here?
You know, when you do comparative analysis, you don't try to find the exact same situations, because there are no. The reality is different, the background is different. But sometimes you can learn from the experiences of other places and then be inspired to act differently. I think the other cities can teach important lesson for the people in Jerusalem, which is that the city and the urban framework of the city cannot be split into two. And it can be disastrous to the city and to the people of the city if it will be divided. And if it cannot be divided, we need to start thinking of other options, of open borders. And open borders brings a whole different framework of relationships which wasn't discussed in Oslo. Oslo was under the framework of division. In Israel we used to say a good fence creates good neighbors, but Jerusalem is proving again and again that we need to think differently about the peace process and about the right settlement and negotiations between the sides. If we are talking about mutual recognition and understanding that we are interdependent and we are here to live together, then we need to think of new frameworks of inclusiveness, decision-making, rights, equality, etc. In all three cities, as I said, the city forced the governments to consider this gray area and by this to transform the relationships into something else. Another project that I wanted to talk about, which is very, very important, is about the role of women. We also initiated several projects that empower women to take a lead in their own societies. We started in the private sector with entrepreneurship focusing on women. Secondly, here in the Environmental Center, we offer courses specifically for women in regarding to urban farming, beekeeping, rooftop gardening. And thirdly, we had several forums focusing on the role of women in peace building and in conflict resolution. And by this, we believe that as the role of women will increase and as women will become more central in leading their societies, this is how we can eventually have a more inclusive societies and having, we believe, better peace-building process.
Are women really important to actually be able to speak into them because of the fact that they're a main key within the family, looking after their children and influencing their children?
Look, we can look at this year of pandemic in COVID-19 and we see that the countries that faced the pandemic in a better way were those that were led by women. You can look at New Zealand, and you can look at other countries in Europe. There is something with maybe female leadership that brings more openness to questions, more tolerance into difference of perspectives, and maybe more inclusiveness in including those that think differently. All three are very, very important when we think about the negotiations and about peace building in general. If women will become more central, then relations between the sides can be different. Besides that, we know about the Resolution 1325 of the UN that speak about the role of women. It was a Security Council decision about the role of women in decision-making and the role of women in transforming conflicted societies. This resolution also promoted the idea of including women in decisions regarding foreign relations and also in negotiations. The main idea behind it is the understanding that if you exclude such a big part of the society, you cannot really promote values of inclusiveness and peace and equality. Women should be a basic part and a central part in every change that is happening in order to experience or to promote a different and better reality and society for all.
Have women felt like second-class citizens here, and is it changing now?
In traditional societies, women are very central in maintaining the households. Here in East Jerusalem, women are unemployed. There is a very high unemployment of women. And because of this, empowering women to take a lead, whether in the private sector or in urban farming and beekeeping, it can empower them to take a better role in their society and to lead it to somewhere else. In traditional societies, and especially in this country and in this region, women are marginalized from decision-making processes. I don't know if I should say second-class citizens, but they are inferior in comparison to men.
Is religion a part to play in that?
It's a Christian radio station, so you can tell me. But I like to say tradition and not about the religion itself, because religion have different aspects to it, and there are different scholars or clergies that can speak about it different. We can look at Islam that was very revolutionary towards the role of women at the time. We can look at Judaism that had an important female leaders in its history and in the Bible. We can look at Christianity as well, that in many periods along the history, women had a very central role in the local institutions, in the local leadership. Especially if we look at the Anglican Church of the UK, but generally in the history. So it's not the religion itself, but how the tradition decides to look at the religion. Many times how the living conditions or the culture pushed the women away from decision-making. In Judaism, the Orthodox communities, ultra-Orthodox communities, marginalize women from decision-making processes. We know that the two ultra-Orthodox parties within Israel don't have women representation at all. We know as well that although women in ultra-Orthodox families are a central part in generating income, they are not able to be represented and decide in regarding the public sphere. This is a bit changing in the last years, but still there should be more and more programs that empower women to take a lead, to take a leadership role in order for us to transform these traditional societies to something that is more inclusive towards the women.
Now, Jerusalem is a divided city with Arabs and Jews. Do both sides mix at all?
You said that Jerusalem is a divided city, but I think this can be questioned. Jerusalem has marginalized areas. Jerusalem is very unequal. Jerusalem, in many aspects, especially politically and nationally, is polarized. But geographically, East and West are not fully divided. They are divided culturally, economically. And as we see in the last 5 years, this historical division is changing. There is more and more integration between the sides for many different reasons. Whether it's the separation wall that pushed East Jerusalemites to integrate to the west side, whether economic incentives that push people to be hired or to look for jobs in the west side, whether it's the general westernization of the Middle East, I can say. We can see it through the Arab Spring, but not only, that there is a process of liberalization which push people to think of their individual conditions and how they can improve their own lives. Anyway, all of these factors push the people from East to integrate to the West. And by this we can see more and more Palestinians in the public sphere of the West Side. We can see more Palestinians studying in Israeli universities, especially the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. We can see more Palestinians working in the West Side. And we can see more and more Palestinians from East Jerusalem learning Hebrew. which became a very popular trend across East Jerusalem. Not only this, we can see more and more Palestinians asking for having a full Israeli citizenship. For those who don't know, East Jerusalemites, Palestinians, are defined as permanent residents of Israel. This was a result of the annexation following the 1967 war, the annexation of East Jerusalem neighborhood. But this didn't give them full citizenship, which was conditioned upon request. And in the last decade, but even more in the last 5 years, we can see a growing trend of requesting those citizenships. This citizenship allow East Jerusalemites to move abroad, to move to the West Bank, to vote in Israeli elections. And by this, their status is not conditioned. If you don't have the Israeli citizenship and you move out, your status of Jerusalemite resident can be taken and can be revoked. So asking for Israeli citizenship in some way maintain your position in Jerusalem and your connection to the city.
Is that easy to actually achieve, to get Israeli citizenship?
It's a very bureaucratic process. You can wait for more than a year for your turn. It's not so easy. You need to prove that you're based in Jerusalem. You need to, in some way, to prove your Hebrew skills, or that your center of living is in Jerusalem or even Israel. But it's becoming easier with time for different reasons, whether the application can be submitted all across the city and not in the office that is close to your place, whether some statuses will automatically receive the citizenship, whether there are more and more lawyers that are helping those communities to apply, or whether there was an adoption of online processes which make it a bit easier. But still it seems that the bureaucracy kind of limits the numbers in order for it not to become like a very, very popular trend.
Here in the Holy Land, there's a lot of tourists. Can tourism bring peace?
Look, over the last year, there was no tourism because of the pandemic. I wonder what will happen afterwards. I think tourism can have a major role in creating incentives for people to work together and creating incentives for telling a different story of this country. But it depends which kind of tourism. Tourism that tells only one-sided story. Tourism that see a very limited perspective towards the reality. It's not only pushing for conflict resolution, but the opposite. It can have an opposite trend of supporting one side on the account of the other, or strengthen a very nationalistic point of view. If, for example, the Christian tourists that come here only go through the Zionist tourism programs, the political statements of the Zionist side will be strengthened. However, if they choose companies that are working binationally, or they set foundations of building cross-boundary and cross-communal, then they are supporting work that brings the people together. And I call here tourists that are coming to this country to choose those companies carefully. If it's a company that is shared by both sides, it's a company that will promote better conditions. If it's companies that are one-sided, then they probably will strengthen one side on the account of the other. I believe that as for fair trade, or in choosing green products that are less polluting, a new aspect should come to mind, and it's the measurement of the companies according to how they support conflict resolution or how they support the current conditions. If there are companies that challenge the status quo and try to promote different values of peace building, conflict resolution, and partnership between the sides, then they should be supported, and other companies should be criticized and maybe questioned.
Are you hopeful for the future?
That's an interesting question, because if we look at the climate crisis, and if we look at the current political system in Israel, if we look at the rising violence of Jews towards Arabs, and rising racism of radical right-wing groups towards Arabs, if we look at the rising violence within the Arab society in Israel and proliferation of weapons, the situation is very problematic and even deteriorating. On the other hand, we can look at the growing numbers of projects that bring people together, the growing interest of both sides to learn the language of the other, the growing presence of Palestinians in Israeli TV channels, in Israeli reality shows, and the growing numbers of bilingual schools and kindergartens. You can also look at the last peace deals that Israel signed with the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco as something that can bring new horizon to the country and bring incentives that will push people to connect, maybe to integrate Israelis in the region. So it's very difficult for me to choose sides. There is a lot of light and a lot of shadow at the same time. The question is what we do within it and how we support the light in front of the shadow. I think that within several years, we can see all the people that grew up within these shared programs and shared schools and bilingual schools. This will create a new camp in this country that will be mixed in its identity. It will be an Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish and Arab. And this will create a whole new perspective about the future of this country, a future that is shared and not divided, that is mutual and not one-sided. And this is something that we should hope for.
Are you making a difference here?
I think you can ask them if there is a difference. I think regarding the women that participate in the courses, those that are becoming more knowledgeable of beekeeping and urban farming, it creates a difference. They can generate income, then produce honey, they grow food, they improve the living conditions in their households and in their neighborhoods. Hopefully this will become a coalition that will change how the neighborhoods look like and how the city looks like. So for the lives of the people that participate in our programs, some change is happening. In regarding to the situation as a whole, as I said, we put seeds on the ground that only years from now we will see what will come up from them. But we are facing such strong opposing trends that it's very difficult to make change towards the better. There is very strong actors that invest in expanding the conflict and invest in nationalistic movements and racist movements. Some of it, unfortunately, comes from resources invested by the evangelical Christians that supports here very nationalistic right-wing groups within Israel and that operate here in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank. And they are investing in their millions. And here, like many other peace organizations, we are talking about a very low number of resources in comparison to these investments from the evangelical Christian community. I hope that now, after the last decision made by the American Congress to invest in peace building in Israel-Palestine and to build a new fund, maybe more resources will be invested and then we can improve the situation. But generally, regarding comparison of resources, it's very, very different in amounts. What is invested in peace building and what invested in supporting the nationalistic, divisive, racist groups.
What's your hope for the future?
I hope that both sides will understand that they are interdependent on each other, that the quality of air, water, quality of sea, quality of the ground, their food is all depending on their ability to live together and to change how they were living up until now. The second is I would really hope both sides to recognize the fact that the other side is rooted in this country and is here to stay. Whether we look at the history different, now we are here together. And the land doesn't belong to anyone. We are guests in some way. We are temporary on this land. And if we continue to fight, we destroy the land. That is so important for all of us. And when we will understand that both sides are here to stay, and both sides are connected to this land, we can create new systems that are more equal, more inclusive, more representative, and also a system that tells the story of both sides, that tells the connection of both sides to this place. And then we can finally look at this country of how it was historically, a place of many cultures and many religions, a place that represented diversity and not one that represented conflict and occupation and oppression. In some way, this land is the most fertile land in the region. If you can look from satellite perspective, you can see a whole desert and suddenly a green area. Starting from here, Jerusalem, going all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. This place is in some way heaven in the middle of the desert. It's not only in the religious text that it's called Holy Land, but also geographically we can see it is a very fertile land in comparison to its surroundings. This place should become, even in the future, a place of inspiration and a place that represents something different for the people around it and for the people of the world.
What's your website, Facebook page for people who'd like to know more?
This environmental center has a Facebook page called Sinsila. It's the Sinsila Center, and it's connected to another environmental center in West Jerusalem, which is called Muslala. Both have Facebook pages. Muslala has also a website. Regarding our center, we have a website for IPCRI, for the Center for Regional Initiatives. It's IPCRI.org.
Okay, Liel, thank you much.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for joining us today. Pray that God will move by his mighty power in the Holy Land and bring his peace.